The night shift at St. Jude's Hospital in New Haven was usually a rhythmic dance of beeping monitors and soft footsteps, but the air tonight felt heavy, thick with a tension I could not name. Suddenly, the windows rattled in their frames as the thunderous roar of a Black Hawk helicopter cut through the silence of the city. It was an unscheduled landing on our rooftop pad, a chaotic arrival that sent the emergency department into a frenzy. I rushed to the bay just as the heavy doors swung open, and a team of military medics, their faces masked in grim determination, pushed a gurney through. They were moving with a desperate, almost violent speed. A high-ranking officer blocked my path, his hand firmly on my shoulder, telling me to stand back, that this was a classified matter and the man on the gurney was already gone. But as they passed, I saw his hand fall limp from the side of the bed. There, just above his left wrist, was a peculiar mark I had never seen, a black circle with a silver cross etched perfectly in the centre. The lead paramedic shouted that it was too late, that there was no pulse, and we should prepare for transport to the morgue. But as I reached out to steady the gurney, my fingers brushed against the man's neck. He was cold, yes, but beneath that skin, I felt a faint, rhythmic vibration that didn't match a heartbeat. It felt like a signal. I looked up at the officer, and for a split second I saw pure terror in his eyes, not for the life lost, but for what I might have just felt. If this story has already gripped you this far, please subscribe to the channel right now, because what comes next will surprise you even more. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching from, as we love to know how far our stories reach. My name is Evelyn Vance, and for 15 years I have walked these sterile corridors, thinking I had seen everything. I grew up in a small, quiet town in Vermont, where the biggest scandal was a broken fence, but New Haven has a way of showing you the darker shades of reality. I have seen miracles and I have seen tragedies, but nothing prepared me for the man in Trauma Room 4. The military personnel were acting like guards rather than grieving comrades. They hovered over the body, whispering in codes and glancing at the clock as if waiting for a deadline. I stood in the corner, my heart hammering against my ribs, pretending to check the monitors that were flatlined. I needed to know why my hands were still tingling from that touch. My supervisor, a woman who usually demanded absolute order, was nowhere to be found, leaving me alone with these men who smelled of jet fuel and secrets. I began to wonder if the hospital I called home had suddenly become a foreign territory. The way they spoke about the soldier was clinical, devoid of the respect usually given to a fallen hero. It felt more like they were disposing of evidence. Thank you so much for staying with me until now. This shows that you feel the same way I did when I lived through all of this. So subscribe now and turn on the notification bell, because what happens next changes everything. I waited for a moment of distraction, a brief second when the officer turned his back to answer a secure radio call. I moved to the soldier's side, my hands trembling as I reached for his wrist again. The black circle with the silver cross seemed to pulse under the harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room. It was not a tattoo, it was a brand, perfectly symmetrical and slightly raised. As I pressed my thumb against the center of the cross, the soldier's fingers suddenly clamped around my wrist with a strength that nearly broke my bones. His eyes snapped open, but they were not focused on me. They were staring at something far beyond the ceiling. He pulled me close, his breath smelling of ozone and copper, and whispered a single string of numbers, 0, 9, 4, 2, 7, Bravo. Before I could scream or call for help, he went limp again, his eyes rolling back. The monitors remained flat, a steady, haunting drone that filled the room. The officer turned around, his eyes narrowing as he saw me standing so close to the body. He asked me what I was doing, his voice a low growl that carried a clear threat. I hid my bruised wrist behind my back, my mind racing. I realized then that the paramedics had lied. The man was not dead, but he was being kept in a state that looked like death for a reason I could not comprehend. I want to know from you now. Where are you watching this story from? Write it in the comments. It is incredible to see people from so many places following stories like this. The next few hours were a blur of adrenaline and fear. I retreated to the nurse's station, trying to act normal, but my eyes kept darting toward the closed doors of Trauma Room 4. I checked the digital admission logs, searching for any record of a military transport or a patient arrival at 2200 hours. There was nothing. The system showed the trauma bay was empty. It was as if the helicopter, the soldiers, and the dying man had never existed. I looked out the window at the New Haven skyline, the lights of the city flickering like distant stars. This was a city of secrets, built on old money and hidden corridors, and I was suddenly caught in the middle of one. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine when I saw a black sedan parked across the street, its headlights off, pointed directly at the hospital entrance. I knew then that I wasn't just a witness. I was a liability. I started to think about my own life, my quiet apartment, and how easily everything could be taken away. Have you ever been through something like this, where you had to hide the truth, or stay in silence? Tell me in the comments. As the sun began to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges, the military team finally moved. They didn't use the main elevators. They took the service lift that led to the underground loading dock. I followed at a distance, my footsteps echoing in the empty hall. I watched from behind a heavy fire door as they loaded the soldier into an unmarked van. Just before they closed the doors, the officer looked back, his gaze scanning the windows of the hospital. I ducked away, my heart echoing the numbers the soldier had whispered. 0, 9, 4, 2, 7. Bravo. I realized that the brand on his arm was a marker for something experimental, something the world wasn't supposed to see. I had spent my life healing people, believing in the sanctity of every breath. But tonight, I learned that some lives are treated as property. I went home that morning, but I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the street, waiting for the knock on the door that I knew was coming. The following day, the hospital felt different. The air was sterile, but carried a metallic tang that made my skin crawl. My supervisor called me into her office, her face uncharacteristically pale. She didn't look me in the eye as she told me there had been a glitch in the security footage from the previous night, and that I should forget about the training exercise on the roof. Training exercise? The lie was so blatant it felt like a slap in the face. I walked back to my station, passing the room where the soldier had been. It was perfectly clean. The bed made with crisp white sheets, no sign of the struggle or the secret I'd carried out of there. I knew then that the hospital administration was either terrified or complicit. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silver cross inside the black circle. It felt like a curse, a mark that I had now inherited just by seeing it. I began to do my own research, using an old laptop at a public library to avoid being tracked. I searched for military symbols and experimental units. That's when I found it. A redacted file from a decade ago, mentioning a project titled Project Eterna. It described a method of induced hibernation for deep cover agents, marked by a specific brand on the left wrist, to identify them to recovery teams. The numbers the soldier gave me were a coordinates code for a location just outside the city limits, an abandoned warehouse near the old docks. My professional life was a mess, my nerves were frayed, and I knew I was being followed, but the nurse in me couldn't let it go. That man was still alive, trapped in a nightmare, and I was the only one who knew he was breathing. The final confrontation happened on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of day where New Haven feels like it's underwater. I was cornered in the parking garage by the officer from that night. He didn't use a weapon, he used words, reminding me of my family in Vermont, and how accidents happen on slippery roads. But I wasn't the same nurse who had started that shift a week ago. I looked him in the eye and told him I had already sent the coordinates and the project name to a contact at the local news. It was a bluff, but his hesitation told me everything I needed to know. They were afraid of the light. I walked away that day, and a week later, the Project Eterna facility was raided by federal authorities after an anonymous tip about illegal human experimentation. I never saw the soldier again, but sometimes, when I'm working the night shift and a helicopter flies over, I look at my own wrist and remember the vibration of a life that refused to be forgotten. I chose the truth over my safety, and though I lost my job at St. Jude's, I kept my soul. What would you have done in my place? Your opinion matters to us, so please leave a comment and subscribe for more stories of courage and the unknown. Don't forget to watch the next recommended video on your screen.